Hey guys, this is Wayne Congar. I'm the founder and CEO at Huts. Have a real pleasure today to be sitting down with Bill Caleo, who's the founder at the Brooklyn Home Company, which is a really design-led home developer in Brooklyn and a company that I've been following for a long time because I think that Bill, you and your team have really reimagined what a developer can be and changed for me a lot of the perspective on some of the guiding principles that can go into a developer's project, including design, attention to detail, context. And so it's really exciting to chat with you about some of your thoughts on the way that design and development come together.
Thank you so much, Wayne. It's a pleasure to talk to you about this, and I'm humbled by your words, and I have a lot of respect for what you're building right now too. So, congrats on that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Bill, maybe before anything, I'm really familiar with the Brooklyn Home Company. I've been following all of your projects. I wish one day I could live in one. But maybe you can give us a little bit of a background on what the Brooklyn Home Company is and what you
Sure.
guys do.
So we're a family business. We've been around since about 2004, maybe 2005. And I have a business background and have a master's degree in acting and moved to New York City in the year 2002 to be an actor. And they say that when you're an actor, if you find something that you like as much as acting, you're going to gravitate towards that. And I was in Brooklyn in Park Slope, like sort of looking at the real estate market. Brooklyn was a much different place then, as you probably know. When I would say, I live in Brooklyn, people would say, ooh, why? Why'd you make that choice? And I was like, because I like it. It's a beautiful place to be, and I could see it changing. And so I wanted to be a part of that. And I bought a 2-family house and did my first renovation of that house and really enjoyed it. I remember the first day we started demo. I hired a handyman to really do the demo. And he was like crushing out the old kitchen. And I remember walking in and thinking, I think I could do this. I think this is going to be fun. And it was the idea, sort of being an actor, it's like storytelling, transformation, and doing it in Brownstone, Brooklyn, with so much character and interesting neighbors and so much culture. It wasn't just the building, it was the whole experience and the transformation of Brooklyn that I wanted to be a part of. And I also saw a lot of homes that were for sale that were done very poorly. And I felt like it could be done better. And so over the years, with the help of my family members and a great creative team, we've built a team that has done it together for many, 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 many years and made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of successes and learned how to sort of function and build the highest and best use for each home that we sell, whether it be a townhouse or a condominium. And now we're doing some rentals or the rentals that we're creating. How do we always create that highest and best use and make it about the creativity first, about the artistry, about the craftsmanship? How do we integrate that so people really feel that and everything is considered as we go?
I think it's a really interesting point around craftsmanship and whether it is preserved or integrated, whether you have to bring it in or whether you're kind of drawing it out of the property. And one of the things that always compels me about Brownstone Brooklyn is that it's a templatized format, right? New York City's a grid. Brooklyn is broken up into 20 by 100 lots everywhere. The idea of either a 2 or 3 family brownstone as the basic building block of the entirety of the residential housing stock across Brooklyn is sort of known. And then while all the facades tend to have similar characteristics, behind the walls, all kinds of different things have happened. You kind of come behind the front gate and walk in through the parlor floor, and you might see a house that seemingly feels unchanged from 1885 when it was built. Then you have projects that some pieces have been held onto, and others have been sort of gutted over time, or things have really been sort of taken down the wrong path. They have lots of like 80s glass block in them, and they're sort of renovated whenever anyone through the generations had a few nickels to pull together and they were able to do a project. And so when you guys are working on these projects where while the size and volume of a Brooklyn townhouse might be standard, but the condition inside could be totally different, how do you sort of evaluate that best use? How do you think about what to preserve, when to integrate kind of net new character into the place, and when to draw something out that's
Sure.
already existing?
Well, as a developer, I'm usually looking at the houses that are in very poor condition, and the majority of them do need to be gut renovated. There's not a lot to preserve. There's been times where we have preserved the original details, but I can only count about a handful. The majority of these houses have been what you described, renovated 9 times very poorly over the history. And that it's just easier to rip basically everything out on the interior and start from scratch. Now, it's helpful if there's beautiful fireplaces that are marble or wood. We'll try to preserve those. Um, the facades are always in pretty good condition. I mean, a brick and brownstone building is a really well built structure that can last 100 more years. So it's just about the careful restoration of that. And then in our history, we used to always try to preserve some of the old lumber that was inside these buildings. That old wood is so rich and can tell a story. So we would reclaim them, use them for beams. My brother-in-law, Fitzhugh Carroll, who's an artist, would create furniture pieces and we would integrate it into the homes that we sold, or we would do a barn door on a slider with that original wood. Try to find ways to use it to preserve as much as we can. But the real answer to your question is the majority of these houses needed to be gutted to the studs and recreated. And you're just preserving the facade and the approach to the building. And as I said, the majority of those facades are absolutely beautiful. And we do everything we can to restore that original condition.
And I think thinking through, these are sort of poorly stewarded houses to the point before you guys get involved. And I think one of the things that has always come across to me about the Brooklyn Home Company is you're taking the vision of the place all the way through. And we find this a lot with our projects and huts that we're working on land development and then the house development and it's now increasingly working on fixtures and finishes. But then there's also decor and furnishings and sort of playing it all the way out. And I think that one of the things that you guys do so well is sort of bridge the imagination of what people believe they're going to have in their house and kind of make that real all the way through, particularly for like custom furnishing and custom millwork and really seeing the vision all the way through. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that process because it's something that architects on their own rarely do. It's something that interior designers on their own rarely do, and really only through a platform like a sort of design-led development company are you able to kind of pick up on all of these
Yeah, I would
pieces.
say my sister Lindsay was really the leader of us in the beginning, where she couldn't envision what the space ultimately was going to be and how people were going to live in it unless she figured out the entire picture. Like, where is the couch going to go in the living room? How are these people going to eat at their dining table or at their kitchen island? Let's size these bedrooms to for a king size bed or two twins. She really wanted to tell the story soup to nuts so that when we were finished with it we could stage it, put that furniture in, and people could imagine living in that home the way that we imagined it. A lot of people don't have a big imagination about the way a space can be lived in unless they physically see it, and it helped us design and it helps people buy, and it helps people buy at the right price point for us on our ultimate sellout. It's worth putting in that money and attention to detail. It pays off if you really put your heart and your mind behind these projects and you carry them out soup to nuts and really imagine every space and how people will live and how people will entertain. It will be a better space. It's become a part of our values and our culture, and we've just sort of stuck with that since the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one of the questions that we ask in the beginning of any project for huts, and I think any good designer or any good developer should, is sort of imagining what is a day in the life of the inhabitant that's going to be there. How is this place that you're creating essentially going to be the background scenography for a more perfect life they have in mind in the future? What are the sort of vignettes that they're going to play out the story of their life within? And then you make those places particular. And so I think a lot of the standard developers approach is to open up the market to everyone. It's like, this is something that is kind of palatable to lots of people. But I think one of the things that you do very well, and we always endeavor to do at Huts as well, is how do you make it the thing for a person who really sees themselves in that place and can't imagine themselves anywhere else? You talk a lot about storytelling. Is that when you're starting a new project, do you think about the script of the people who are going to be there and how they'll
Yeah,
inhabit the place?
absolutely. One thing we do is, realtors get a bad rap sometimes. Um, a lot of people think that realtors don't know what they're talking about. And I guess in some cases that's true. But we align with a realtor team from day one. So they're on the street. They see who's buying and what people are looking for. And those details are ultimately very important to us because we're selling everything speculatively. We're guessing on who the customer is going to be. So not only do we need to understand the customer, we need to understand their needs. And we think through each room. How are they going to entertain in this living room? How do we attach outdoor space to that living room so we can have an indoor-outdoor situation? Where are people going to put their glasses in the kitchen? We over-design our kitchens for this. There's so many kitchens in New York City that are undersized. There's not enough cabinetry to fit just the normal items that everyone has. We think through each cabinet. It's really important. I don't want anybody to come to me and say, this is a weird kitchen. I've got nowhere to put this mixer. So, it's part of our process. It's important to us. And it disappoints me when we fail someone and we don't provide the design attributes that they really need. These people are spending a lot of money on these homes. This is their primary home, their primary investment. I want to nail it for them. It's important.
Yeah, and it's also, like you said, you're doing it on spec. You're sort of nailing it for a person that you have to imagine with enough detail that the decisions you put into place feel like it was for them. And I think you're so right, particularly in New York City development. There are things that we imagine in a home anywhere else that get sort of abandoned in the design exercise in New York. Kitchens being number one. Like, well, you're going to get delivery, right? The oven's also sort of a shoe closet, right? And it's like, no, like more and more, this is a place that is really excellent for bringing up a family, for having kids, for living a real life, and not sort of like this transient way of being. And that means the kind of basic building block of a life, which is the home that you kind of build your memories within, need to support all of those things. And so, I think it's a very thoughtful name behind your brand that I think that you've been making more and more real with each project. But to define what a home is in Brooklyn, I think is part of the mission. Maybe you can tell me a bit about that. I mean, I think that there's a real difference between house as sort of abstract asset to people and home as a sort of lived experience that is sort of a backdrop for their life. And like, when does a property make that transition from being a house to
That's
a
a
home?
great question. And as you were talking, it brought up some things from the beginning, which was we have to remember the economic dynamics between Manhattan and Brooklyn when I started out in 2004, which was you got double the amount of space in Brooklyn as you would have gotten in Manhattan. So what was happening is people were ordering takeout in their tiny kitchen in Manhattan, but living in the West Village or someplace cool, and moving to Brooklyn to start the real thing. This is going to be our real life. We're making a choice right now. We don't want to be in Westchester. We don't want to be in Long Island. We want to make home in an urban environment and get double the space that we were going to get in Manhattan. So it was about the ability to have family, whether it's just 2 people or 3 people or 4 people, how you expand that family. How do you create space where everyone's going to feel an oasis, a comfort, getting away from the city, escaping the city, and then inviting your friends into the space that you couldn't invite them to in Manhattan because it was a much smaller space. So it almost happened because of economic drivers. We knew we were providing double the space. We knew we had to be an alternative to Manhattan. And we knew we had to be an alternative to the suburbs. The suburbs was also our competitor. So once we knew those things, we would design to that, creating a home where your dog could go in the backyard or on your balcony, or even a dog on a roof or something, depending on if it was a condo or a townhouse. This is where your dog and your kids are going to live. How do you make that home in an urban environment? And it was a great challenge. It's very interesting. And now prices in Brooklyn have gone way up and it's more competitive with Manhattan, but people still want that. They still want to escape the city.
There's also an interesting thing that I think has happened too since you started. It sounds like almost 19 years ago. And we have the same phenomenon with upstate and the Catskills, that this is sort of a loose brand that people have a perception about. In the same way, you're outside of Brooklyn, even today, you might have this loose, unnuanced perception of it's in Brooklyn. It's like, well, what does that mean? There's lots of Brooklyns. Brooklyn's the fourth biggest city in America on its own. There's all kinds of flavors of that. And so early on, I'm sure that was sort of a clever carrot at the end of the stick. It's sort of, we are the guys that are able to understand what Brooklyn is about and sort of the real Brooklyn. Today, as there's sort of a more nuanced and mature kind of global understanding of Brooklyn as a brand, what is the relationship for you? Are you trying to, do you have a perspective on like what the Brooklyn of tomorrow will be and how you're setting that up? Or are you sort of like riding the coattails a little bit of a general wave around where Brooklyn is headed? I guess I'm trying to understand your kind of, as the Brooklyn home company. What's your thought on what Brooklyn becomes and how do you fit within it?
That's a very big question and a great question. And I think about this almost every day as we navigate where we're going to go next. And I think a few things have happened. Number one, the townhouse is very sought after, especially a finished townhouse that is a comfortable home for an entire family. The price per square foot for a townhouse continues to go up. And key neighborhoods like Brooklyn Heights, Cobble Hill, the pricing when I first started was probably $5 million for a finished house, and everybody was shocked by that. And it could go up to 15, 16, 17, $18 million now. It is the alternative to Tribeca. It is the alternative to the West Village. It's the value play. And the price has skyrocketed. But I also see some other things happening. One is Brooklyn has moved more towards the water. You look at what has happened, and this is government interacting really well with our urban environment and creating the piers that we have in Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's an amazing attraction that opened up a lot of areas of Brooklyn that become very sought after. So I see that happening, and those, some of those types of people want more horizontal living, more service oriented, more, I don't want anybody to steal my packages. I want to live in a door person or a concierge building. So I see that as well, like a shift towards water.
Yeah, and I think it's for any of our audience out there that doesn't live in New York, isn't aware of sort of Brooklyn housing types or New York City housing types. Obviously, you have rental apartments, and there's plenty of them. But the other forms of ownership that are important to understand, if it's not a townhouse, is that you have condos and co-ops. Condos, you own the drywall in, so you kind of own a floating box of air in space. And co-ops, you own shares in a larger building with a set of co-investors in that building, some of which you might get along with and some of which you might not. And I think what Bill is speaking to here around the townhouse is something really interesting that also we find in land parcels as well upstate, that there is a notion of homesteading. There is no real, as long as it's permittable and the zoning allows for it, you can kind of do what you want inside of these spaces. You really own the 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 context of how you're going to live. If you have, say, a peculiar hobby that needs a specific space for it, you can kind of create that. And I think that that's sort of unique. Townhouses are sort of a unique place where that can happen in the city. And some of the reasons that people chase after larger properties elsewhere with no HOA and no governance or any of these things, and some of the reasons they sometimes work with us is that they can't get that space at the townhouse, but they want that same sense of freedom. And so, where can I do this weird thing that I like to do, and I don't have to be bothered in how to create a space for it? And I think that that's such an important piece of really that distinction between what's a house for someone and what is a home for you. How does something become particular to you? And I think it's really fascinating to hear how you're trying to put those pieces together speculatively. How do you walk that line between making something that's sort of universally understood as beautiful and well thought out, but also has enough particularities for the person that property really sings to, that's going to be theirs. They can't leave unless that's their house. And that again is that sort of moment that I think is so important to create for telling the story of a home, which is how do you make it feel like it's yours and nobody else's, and it can't possibly be somebody else's, versus it's another nice thing that exists out there. And I think in our own ways, we're both kind of figuring out how to play that game. Me figuring it out more than you or further behind in that journey of figuring it out. But trying to do that same thing with even raw pieces of land. How do you help people understand what this place is? Yes, I felt something magical when I looked at these trees, but that's a long way from being a developable property and a house and a structure and ultimately a home where it starts to become a bit of a memory palace for us. What are some of the things after you've had customers move into homes that you've been surprised by in their feedback, or even kind of like spatial ideas? Have you had people come back and say, I could have imagined this being in here, or my life changed in this way, and how does this space become sort of how might I change this space? I mean, one of the things I think about a lot is kind of phased living, that you move into a place and it's done, but then and it was done based on what your lifestyle was at that moment, and then 5-7 years down the line, maybe now you have 2 kids, you've got someone else living with you, different things going on. Do you ever think about kind of future flexibility in properties?
Yeah, the first thing that we think about is, how is this property going to age? How is it going to get patina in the right way and look just as good in 5 years as it looked when we gave it to the homeowner? And the reason for that is we tried to sort of design off trend, like use traditional materials that are going to age really well. The worst thing on earth is to go into a condo and be like, in 5 years, this is going to look terrible. They're going to have to rip everything out.
Or to be able to point out the exact year it was completed. It's like that. This is so tragically 2003, and I can point to all the things.
Yeah. So sometimes our designers will come into the room with a beautiful idea, and we'll all question, is this a trend-based decision? Because if it is, we shouldn't do this. And then in terms of space, it's interesting how people use the space. Sometimes people that sort of walk into it with big punch lists and stuff, you think they're going to rip the place apart when they get in, and they don't. They live in it just as you sold it to them for a long, long time. Other people who you don't expect, like, rip something out. Like, we had a customer who wanted a tiny bathroom and an enormous walk-in closet. We had a medium-sized bathroom and a medium-sized walk-in closet. So they made an adjustment. They had no problem. We gave them information. Some people are like interested in things that I didn't think of, which we put in now, like steam showers. Putting in a steam shower after the fact is one of the biggest pains on earth. You basically have to rip everything out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an issue.
So yeah, it is interesting to go back and look and see what people change and why they change it, and how it's really quite unpredictable. That's when you're just dealing with somebody that just needs a space used in a different way than you imagined.
I think one of the things that interests me about housing, maybe more than in a previous life where I was working as an architect on larger sort of civic projects, is that there's no real product sense in those projects. The kind of working on these enormous prototypes for buildings that would get built, but it was a one-off, is never going to happen again. A really beautiful piece of sculpture, but no product sense, which means that there's no feedback loop between real people and the thing that you're creating. And so what's really interesting about revisiting these projects where you imagine it one way and it gets revised a little bit is that on the next go around, it might be that you start seeing steam showers as sort of a standard, that there's a market trend there that you want to have a product response to. And we're starting to see that with some things around both sustainable systems and rather than thinking about green technologies as an alternative, it just is the thing, it's the standard.
In Europe, people that were working in passive house buildings got sick and called out a lot less than people in traditional buildings because of the filtered fresh air constantly coming in and the stale air being extracted. I found this fascinating because I grew up with allergies and asthma and suffered a lot as a kid. And I was like, if I was going to create one amenity, why wouldn't I want to create a healthier air environment? And also lower carbon emissions, because as we all know, we all need to take part in that. In urban environments, buildings are the number one cause of carbon emissions. You know, these big glass towers create a lot of heating and cooling load. So before COVID, the realtor said nobody's going to really understand it, but we wanted to do it. And then COVID hit, and everybody was interested in passive house.
And it's like,
Yeah,
oh, filtered
exactly.
air? Huh. Yeah, that sounds like something I
It
might be
was
interested in.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was like overnight, everyone was like, yeah, that's an amenity that's really important to us. And plus, as the world changes, as we see what happened in Canada with these forest fires, and a lot more brownstones are flooding right now, which that's something that Passive House does as well, is really shoring up all flood areas in a home so you're not going to get water into your cellars, which is a very difficult task. It takes real talent and engineering to figure that out. It became very important to our buyers, and even more important to us once we saw that our buyers were buying in and wanted that to be a part of their experience. So we really made it a focus, and people are really starting to look for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think that and anyone out there, if you're building a new house, you should be thinking about these ideas. Really understanding our values, really understanding, and I include in that gut renovations anything that if you're sort of not creating a house like that, you're doing yourself a disservice, maybe more than anything. But I think it's a really interesting thing that a lot of these ideas that start as something that's amenitized can become standard, and that you can utilize innovative early houses that you develop as a way to educate a market and to say, this is what it should look like. This is what good looks like. And it's no longer sort of an add-on concept. It's just what we do. And I think we're going through some of that as well with kind of geotechnical or geothermal heat pumps, and looking at our window selections, looking at our what is our insulation qualities, ERV in every project. And so how does that become not some other or alternative thing, but just what houses need to look like going forward? And you kind of utilize excellent design and sort of fantastic imagery. And it's almost like, before it becomes totally standardized, how is it a bit of a Trojan horse to say, we're going to get you into this amazing house. And what do you know? It's an infinitely better house. And there's also a nice sort of education to contractors as well. is like, great, we're going to onboard these contractors who maybe haven't done this before. It's a great project for you to work on. And what do you know? Now you're getting really excellent at understanding these
Yeah,
systems.
and as we go, you use heat pumps as an example. You look at the Mitsubishi heat pumps. When I started, we couldn't use it as primary heat because when it got too cold, the efficiency went way down. Heat pumps have changed. Now you can use them in as primary heat in cold climates. And there's more manufacturers, there's more competition, the price comes down. You really see the economies of scale. It becomes a no-brainer. It becomes a new way of working. And it's the same thing with triple pane windows. They used to all come from Europe, obscure factories, it's sort of hard to get parts. That's all changed just in the last 2 years. Much more readily available. Mainstream manufacturers are now supplying them. I agree with you. It's going to become the standard operating procedure is to put these types of amenities and in your home, and it's just going to make our homes more comfortable. That's really the bottom line. More comfortable, more energy efficient, better homes to live in. And it's not things like a beautiful Sub-Zero refrigerator or Waterworks fixtures. It's something that's really tangible and going to improve your health and be more helpful to your community than the homes that were built before.
So just kind of one last point on this, because I think the question of sustainability and what sort of matters in it and what doesn't is always kind of like hotly debated. But I think I do always like looking through these issues economically, and obviously there's sort of the I think the moral requirement of building houses in a better way with less carbon sink in it and less things coming from all over the place, easier to maintain, less sort of load on heating and cooling and environmental factors. But I think it's nice to also position it to consumers as the purchase price of your house is kind of a small part of the puzzle. I mean, yes, it's a big one, but then you're also maintaining it forever. And if you're living in a leaky mess of a house that is just letting all of your hot air out or all of your cold air out or drawing in power from sort of dubious sources, then you're kind of setting yourself up for years and years of a way more expensive maintenance cost than it should be. And so much of I think so much of the reason that like developer or development is sometimes sort of seen as a dirty word is because that's what development looks like in so much of the country. Is like, how quickly can I put up sort of the biggest and worst house that is going to leave people with problems? And I think a big part of what you're up to, and I would say we're sort of up to too, is sort of reframing what a developer can be. That the that if you're led by a different set of principles, then how fast can I get in and out of the kind of biggest, crappiest tract home? Then you have a space for design and sustainability and placemaking and storytelling, and that to be part of the developer's role in creating what remarkable
Yeah,
homes
I
look
think
like.
you're right. I think Huts and Brooklyn Home Company are very similar in that we're putting our name behind everything that we sell. We're only as good as the last house that we sold. So we're going to go back and we're going to take care of our issues and we're going to make sure that our customers are happy. It's really important. There's a lot of developers that get a bad name because they have the ability to hide behind a brand, which is that building, and then run away as quickly as possible. And we actually see it more than I ever imagined we would. And it doesn't mean that Huts or Brooklyn Home is perfect. Stuff happens. You have a break-in period. As long as you're going back and you're being diligent, that's really, really what's important. And, in your business, and I know this from experience, I have a leaky house in Long Island and paying that heating bill when no one is there and it's $500-600 a month. I mean, it's not that I made that number up, but whatever it is, I kick myself. When I had a house in the Catskills, it was super tight. It was new. I had a solar panel. The bill was much less. It felt way better than if I wasn't there, that I wasn't, constantly forking out money for these homes.
Of course, yeah, and I think that's yeah. And for so many of our clients, the idea of understanding the total picture of what they're buying, not just not just the service of getting it and the acquiring the land and building the project, but also what's the backside of the performa? How are you going to maintain this thing forever, and what's that all going to look like? And so often that's sort of the missing number for a lot of folks when they compare sort of poor poor houses as alternatives, either existing inventory that was bad the day it was built, or newly constructed things where people kind of getting in and out as fast as possible. The missing piece on it is it's sort of a relatively unhealthy building that is going to cost a small fortune to maintain forever. You're going to be kind of patching it together. Um, well, Bill, I really appreciate your time here and kind of taking us through your perspective on Brooklyn, on the origin story of Brooklyn Home Company, and particularly the role of design and storytelling and placemaking, and how you kind of convert places from being seen as from houses to homes. I think that that's a really powerful notion, and one that I think sort of developers and designers and anyone who works in residential AEC industry can learn a lot from. That the people who are going to live in this place is why you're making it, and the way that you're sort of satisfying their ambitions and creating the backdrop for the scenes of their life is really the name of the game. And I think that you guys do that better than anyone I've seen in Brooklyn. So really excited to keep following along, and looking forward to continuing to chat with you
I
about all
really
this stuff.
appreciate you asking me to come on, Wayne. I have a lot of respect for what you do. One shameless plug: Brooklyn Home was asked to publish a book with
Please.
Abrams. The book comes out at the end of September. You could pre-order it on the Abrams Publishing website. And it's sort of a chronicle of all of our brownstone Brooklyn work from the very beginning until today, talking about some of our
Oh,
values
fantastic.
and what was important to us, sort of a how to do the Brooklyn brownstone, I'd call it. So if anybody's interested, you could go on Amazon and look up the Brooklyn Home Company and find the book.
Great. We'll definitely include the link in the caption for this video, and I'm excited to get my
Great.
copy as well. Thank you so much, Bill.